This is the Modern Mastery Unleashed podcast.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Modern Self-Mastery Unleashed. I am really excited to introduce you to James M. Powell, spirituality coach. He has been on an incredible experience, and he's the co-author of an international bestseller with Dr. John DiMartini, who, if you don't know, he was in The Secret, which is, if you haven't seen that movie or read the book, I would highly recommend that you go do it. But he was talking about strategic intuition. And before we go any further, I have one question to ask you guys, and that is, are you ready to get stuff done? This has been on everybody's mind. If you've set New Year's resolutions and you maybe haven't quite gone there, or you're getting to the end of the first quarter and you're thinking, I haven't really reached my goals yet, we're going to dive into this topic of strategic intuition with James. And I also just want to let you know that James has spoken on the global stage. He speaks on the global stage. He's been a guest speaker for institutions like the International Coach Federation and Brains Magazine. So I am just so excited to have you here, James. It's going to be an incredible conversation about this, because I'm willing to bet that not a lot of people have heard or have heard of strategic intuition and what that means.
Yeah, thank you, Natalia. I'm really grateful to be here, and following from our previous conversation, which we're still yet to share. There's a lot in there as well. Yeah, I'm really grateful to be here. And it's true, with many people not having heard about how to use strategic intuition, specifically for successful decision making in their business and their personal lives as well. And this is a fundamental aspect of human beings. It doesn't matter where you come from, who you are, what your culture is, whatever. It's something foundational to us as humans. And most people don't know how to properly use that. And in fact, they get trained out of it, especially going through the social, educational, familial environments growing up, where they focus mostly on intellect, not even intelligence, but memorization. That's why when I was in school, I crammed in my studies just a few days before the exam into my short-term memory. I passed, I got good enough grades, and then I forgot it because I didn't need it anymore. I just studied for the exams, right, instead of for life. But I learned a lot of other things during that time in school about myself and what the differences are, and how people are raised. And actually, one thing that benefited me a lot was that I missed 2/3 of my early schooling because of recurring but non-life-threatening illness. I don't have it anymore, but that gave me the opportunity to stay at home. My father was at work, my mother was busy in the house, and I would just read books on all different topics like science, physics, cosmology, the cool things you like to read about when you're a kid. And then I also read books about spirituality in those magazines that I bought from the shop, where I read about nanotechnology and particle physics and so on, alongside paranormal phenomena, out-of-body experiences, and spiritual experiences. So it was a very, very interesting combination, and that led me on to wanting to help others transform belief and hope into understanding and implementation instead. Like you opened with getting stuff done, and there's a big barrier between having to believe in something and being able to implement it. Because if you're believing in something, it takes a lot of energy, and you're hoping it works. But if you can understand it instead, you don't need to believe in it. You can reserve that energy for implementing and taking action. And
it's exactly as you said, and it's one of the reasons why Paul and I started this podcast, is because you can only go so far with thoughts and vision. I mean, they're really good to have, especially like the language that you're using, but what is it that actually gets things done? And you said it's the implementation of it. So I want to kind of explore that topic of strategic intuition and how, like, first of all, what is it? and how anyone can use it to make things happen. Like, stop talking about it, but actually make it happen.
Yeah, right.
Like, I mean, I think if anyone could solve that, everybody wants to make their dreams come true, but if they're stuck in that dream state, or they're not taking the right action, or they're not using the tools within them that we are so gifted with, but we just, for whatever reason, we've either been taught not to use them, or they've just not, that those tools haven't been shown to us. So that's why I was really excited to have you on today, because I think you're going to blow a lot of people's minds here, in terms of how do you make the things that you want happen?
Yeah, so there's a big difference, between like what I teach my clients and how to do is not necessarily how to make it happen yourself, but uh, how to work in harmony with natural law and even spiritual law, which is in the physical, it's expressed physically. It's the same law, it's just expressed differently in a different dimension. You could say different. I mean, it's pretty simple. It's a physical world and spiritual world, right? We have a physical body and a spiritual body, and there's a lot of people look towards spirituality coaches to resolve emotion or happiness or to do affirmations, right? Or maybe they work with crystals and tarot and stuff. Okay, that's all cool, but those are tools. And for some reason, I've always looked at how I can move beyond those. I remember this picture of the comparative analysis between a beginner in spirituality and a master. And the beginner's got all these tools around them, candles, crystals, and all this stuff. And then the master has literally got an empty room. Because the master has internalized it and don't need that anymore. Like when I used to pray and meditate for several hours and fasting during this time in my youth, when at the peak of my extreme kind of experimenting, because I was meditating up to 11 hours a day in one sitting, and I was fasting on just rice and water for 6 months at the time, and I don't recommend that. And I still experiment with my diet now. We can go into that. But at that time, I I was I was doing that while also meditating to very loud music, very loud, distracting music, and then I would reach a point at which I would tune out of that and tune into something else. I would tune into a peaceful environment with a stillness and bright light, and it's just I would not even I'd not even hear any music or anything in my environment. And I had a really awesome PA setup. I had a nice PA system at the time, so it was really good. And I positioned the speakers. I had two bass at the front and mid-range and treble at the back, and I positioned them so the sound waves would meet in the middle and create a sound bubble in the middle of the room, so I could literally not hear anything outside of that sound bubble. And then, but it would accept the loud, noisy music. And then,
Wild.
and then I trained it so many times. Like I've done tens of thousands of hours of this, and I reached a point where I could enter it consistently after 14 minutes. Like nothing was happening, but then after 40 minutes in straight away, and now I can do that in a moment's notice, just because I've put in the hours and I conditioned myself. And that's a lot of people are trying to get into meditation, but that's my default state, and it's a strange experience for me when I come out of that. And I experience things like separate physical objects in a way, I guess, a little bit weird. But like there is a stage at which it is necessary for you to put in effort to make it happen yourself, and that's the self-discipline, right? The conditioning. But then once you reach a stage at which you've done that enough and to a good enough standard that you internalize it and it becomes part of you, it becomes your second nature.
Yeah.
Right? In a way, a part of that is neuroplasticity. When you want to change your emotions or thinking habits from one frame to another, you need to put in the effort to say and do and act, behave in the way that the result that you want, and then your body catches up to it. Right? Your brain will rewire and then those connections get stronger and thicker, and till a point at which they've become connected enough that you don't need to try to make them reach that state, because they've reached it, and therefore you don't need to put in as much effort anymore. It just becomes natural for you to be that way. And so a lot of people don't actually notice or realize in themselves when they've reached that point, and they continue trying to make stuff happen, when now they can simply let it happen in a way, right? But then once you've reached that state of self-mastery within yourself, that's when you start connecting to other people, to the universe, God, source, original being. Think and Grow Rich, Napoleon Hill calls it infinite intelligence. And there's different forms of intelligence, not just intellect, it's artistic intelligence, emotional intelligence. But this is when you start forming cooperative relationships with others. You can create more things together than you can on your own. And this is one reason why we do podcasts, right?
Yeah. Yeah, this came up in a conversation I was having with a friend of mine, Tony Courtney Brown, but we were talking about just the power of collaboration. And you can't, even when we're talking about imposter syndrome and that feeling that people have where they feel like they need to know everything. And then they need to be everything, and they can't ask for help, or else that makes them inferior somehow, which is, it's nonsense. Like you can't possibly reach your true potential if you are all of the things, because you have this unique brilliance inside of you. And I think what I love about what you're saying is almost this redefining of what spirituality is, or what it's been come to know, like what people have been come to know it as. And I love how you just share that. And when you're talking about making effective decisions and using your intuition to make effective decisions, I know you talk about getting into this flow state, and that there is a process of getting into this flow state. And I know it's not, you don't call it flow, you call it something a bit different than just flow state, but can we get into that a little bit? Because I think that's so fascinating how you've made flow into a process. Because for people who, it's like you have the people who need that kind of structure, but then you also have the creative people who are, they just want to, lack of better words, like go with the flow. And they feel like discipline, self-discipline is like putting yourself in this box, and that you can't be creative. So to me, what your work does is it gives a really broad solution for those types of, like the two types of mindsets: the creative who think discipline is just a recipe for disaster. They can't just sit down and do it. Versus the other people who they need that, like, I need to see the process. I need to see step by step how this is going to work,
Yeah, totally. I understand the creative problem, you could call it. And one of the main understandings to bridge that gap is that intuition is not about emotion. This is a big mistake. A lot of spirituality coaches, even intuition coaches, specifically call themselves intuition coaches. They teach you to follow your heart, right? Not wrong. Yeah, heart, intuition, that's a correct understanding. However, they teach to follow their emotions instead of heart, because they don't understand the difference. The heart is the seat of emotion, but emotion is not heart. And if you're always following your emotion, you're always seeking to stay within your comfort zone. You're always seeking to stay peaceful, happy, kind, but we know that growth doesn't come from that. It comes through struggle, even pain sometimes, right? You go to a gym, you do some exercise, like I did push-ups today. That was a bit of a struggle, but I'm looking better, right? So, all right, I'm stronger and everything. So, so you got to be uncomfortable to grow, right? And that's why when you're making higher priority decisions, there's a difference between high priority decisions and low priority decisions. So like everyday decisions, should I go and have my breakfast now, whatever, like it's not high priority, right? But the high priority ones, you can make that breakfast decision based off how you feel, right? On your emotion, whatever. But the high priority ones where there's a lot more at stake or at risk, it could be in terms of people, the people you're serving could be customers or colleagues. It could be you have an influence over a larger geographical radius, or it could be an influence through time that grows. And then anything that's at a higher level of impact, you could say as well. Even in terms of making or losing money, you want to remove emotion from the picture, right? So you can make the most logical decisions possible, right? Because it's not about how you feel, because emotions are not reliable. There are many things that can make you feel good, but are not good for you, like some drugs, right? Certain behaviors, right? There's many things. You can take a drug and be happy instantly. If you want to be happy, that's not the purpose of spirituality, right? You can take some nootropics. Actually, I have a nootropic that I recommend via my email list that is produced in Scotland in the UK. It's 100% plant-based. And it now has, I found it before this, but it now has the support of the UK's largest mental health charity. It's a huge endorsement, right? And this product's amazing. It's just herbs and stuff like that, but it's fantastic. So it's like a natural solution. And so they help people save time and having to do the experiments themselves to find out what foods affect them in different ways, different combinations and quantities. They've done all that for us, right? So now they just provide it and you can reap the benefits, right?
Yeah.
So happiness itself is not such a high goal. Because you can stay inside your comfort zone. If you're struggling a bit, you can take this change your diet. It's essentially what these pills are, right? It's a change of diet because food is your mood. And so the way that I teach people how to leverage intuition is to get specific and actionable intelligence, specific and detailed actionable intelligence. This is new knowledge that you've not been exposed to before, right? You haven't acquired it anywhere else, but it's new information that you get via your intuition. And intuition is a sense, it's a sensory organ or communication channel. It's not the thing that you talk to. A lot of people say, I'm talking to my intuition. No, it's a sense. You're talking to or communicating with a source of information via your intuition, right? And it is the highest spiritual sense. And the reason why I chose to focus on it instead of the other spiritual senses, you might call clairvoyance, clairaudience, whatever, but essentially it's the same 5 physical senses or bodily senses that we have physically, but our spirit body has the same senses, right? Hearing, smell, taste, touch, and sight. Is that, I don't, what's the other one?
Sound, taste, touch. Sight, sound, taste, touch.
Yeah. So
hearing. Yeah.
Right. So, these are bodily senses, right? And there's other kind of different types of senses, like sense of balance, sense of temperature, stuff like that. But these are the 5 main senses and the bodily senses, right? And they allow us to perceive and interact with our environment. So the environment for our physical body is a physical environment, and the equivalent environment for our spirit body is a spiritual environment, okay? Physical world, spirit world, 2 different worlds, 2 different bodies, and 2 types of selves, right? That's why people say we're a spiritual being having a human experience, right?
Love that. Yeah.
Okay. Right? We're essentially spiritual and we're experiencing the physical world for a limited period of time. And so with intuition being a sense to acquire information, and it should not be based on guesswork either, because a lot of people experience intuition as being based on guesswork, but that is in relation to their gut instinct, or what they call it, their hunch, right? It's the gut instinct. But that's the last step of like you mentioned, what I call the flow of intuition. Okay, so there's 3 steps to this, and like I'm like super grateful that I found this, because it just clarifies the whole thing, and people don't need to believe in it anymore, right?
Yeah.
And the whole concept of following your heart, and using the terms instinct, intuition, you know, all these things interchangeably and synonymously as though they mean the same thing when they don't, actually prevents people from being able to effectively implement it. And but that's not to say that people can't they can't get results from it. They can, because we can make a lot of mistakes along the way and still kind of, force our way through and get a result, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But like, that's what I'm saying, is reducing the amount of effort you have to invest to get the result you want, right? Because if you know how the system works properly, you don't need to put in as much effort, but you can potentially even get a greater result than if you were trying to power your way through a system that's broken. So
Yeah.
the flow of intuition, it starts with the heart, right? So heart is intuition, then it goes to the intellect in the brain, and then the instinct is in the gut. So it's intuition, intellect, instinct. And so heart, brain, gut. And these are actually the three brain systems of the body, which in biology that we now know that they have neurons just like the brain. The only reason we call them second brain, third brain is because we found neurons in the brain first, in the cranial brain in the skull, and then we found them in the heart. But if we found them in the heart first and then found them in the brain, we'd probably call the brain and the gut the second and third heart, right?
That's so fascinating.
So the reason why that's important as well to understand that is that in terms of the flow of electrical information between these three brains, the heart sends more information to the brain than the brain sends to the heart. Okay, so the heart is predominant in terms of the flow of electrical information via the electrical cables in the body, which are the neurons. And there's I think there's like 100,000 neurons in the heart, 40,000 in the gut or something. It's significant, and they're the same types of neurons. These are literally like brain neurons. So our consciousness is not contained in our brain, in our skull, but it's processed through our body via our neurons, and specifically focusing on these three main centers. And there's and also in terms of the electromagnetic output that the brain and the heart and the gut produce, like we know the brain has brain waves, we call it like electromagnetic waves or light, right? Which is what it is. We measure it using an electrosonograph ECG machine. You can see the little bloop on the screen, right?
Yeah.
So the heart, every single organ, every single cell has that. This universal structure, atoms, everything have that. The planet, people are familiar with that. And this is what people, spirituality coaches and spiritually open people typically call the aura, right? It's the biologically generated or emitted electromagnetic field of the body, which is light being produced by the cells. And based on the state of the cell, it will produce different information in the light. So frequency, strength, spin, whatever. There's many different ways information is encoded in light. That's why we use it in technology, fiber optics, with our phones, wireless communication, Wi-Fi, it's all light, right? Radio waves and so on. It's the same stuff. It's just different frequencies. We call it different names to identify the frequency range we're talking about. But this is how our phones are able to communicate, because they communicate electromagnetically. And so the body has the same system. And so I just want to backtrack a bit, because I mentioned about intuition being the highest spiritual sense. And I focus on it instead of the bodily senses, because you can use intuition without having to be spiritually open, right? Without having to have your spiritual senses open and perceive things you may or may not have the skill to deal with. It takes time to learn how to use them properly, just like it takes time for us to develop our physical skills and abilities, right? Same spiritually. So I don't focus on helping people unless they want to specifically. And I think if I think it's appropriate to do that, then but mostly I don't. Like to help people to open their spiritual senses, because there's a lot of preparation that needed before that. I've been open since I was a child, but I've learned how to close it down and then open it at will. So I've learned how to turn it on and off. That's been my strong point. But then I also learned the intuition. I teach intuition because that's you don't need to be spiritually open for that, and it's a lot safer. So in terms of the information in the heart, we can measure the flow of electrical information via the neurons, okay, the electrons and so on. And so that when the so-called intuition happens, there's a spike of electrical activity that occurs in the heart, and it's only there for about 2-3 seconds. So that's the spike of intuition that occurs, electrical activity that occurs in the heart. Where does that come from? Doesn't come from in the body. That's a response of the body. And then that electrical information flows to the brain and the intellect. And that's where we're supposed to reason and rationalize about the intuition we've received and ask excellent questions to better understand it. But what most people do is they doubt and second guess their intuition, right? They talk themselves out of it. And this is a big mistake that a lot of people make. Should I do that? Did I really get that? Is it real? All right. And then they don't do anything with it. But then high achievers, on the other hand, high achievers, top performers who make a lot of successful decisions based on their gut. And there's many quotes of this online. I got a book by of conversations with Einstein called Einstein and the Poet in Search of the Cosmic Man by William Hermans, right? It's an excellent book. And he talks in there so much about intuition. It'll give you a totally different perspective on Einstein. And the high achievers typically make their decisions based on their gut, which is the instinct in the gut. That's where the intuition, once we've processed it with intellect, goes to the gut instinct. And that's where we take action. That's where we put it into action with our body. It's where the will is in the gut, right? But high achievers, they make decisions based on their gut without being engaged in the previous 2 steps. So they get the intuition, they don't doubt it, but they don't question it either. So they don't better understand it. It just almost goes direct to the gut, and they take action without understanding. But the point is that they take action, right? And this is why for high achievers, could be high-level CEOs or high-level employees, business owners, they make decisions and they can't explain why. They don't know how it works, and they can't help others replicate it either. Right? So they still have more potential to unlock in their decision-making process, because if they were able to engage their intellect in that process too, and know how to engage intellect with intuition to then make better decisions with their instinct, they can make much better informed decisions instead of just gut decisions. And that's why it feels like almost guesswork for them, because it's not an informed decision, although it is a decision. So this is where you're coming at 2 different angles. The people who doubt their intuition, they don't take action. But then those who do take action, but they kind of bypass the second step. So there's still potential to unlock, and for both high achievers and those who are still in the process of realizing their potential as a high achiever. So yeah, just to summarize, that was like a long explanation that it goes from heart, intuition, intellect in the brain, and then the gut instinct. And it's like it's telling a fish water exists, right? It's obvious because you already know these terms.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, when we were talking about it, I was really just surprised at how it all came together and it just all made sense. Like you said, I mean, I've heard about the heart-brain connection before, but then it's not out of the realm of possibility to go heart, brain, gut, because it makes sense. And I think the flow of it, how you're talking about the flow of intuition. And it's so fascinating that you use those examples of, the high achievers and they have the intuition, but it goes straight to their gut. Like they just don't think about it because they just follow their instincts, like you said.
Right.
And yeah, and it's interesting because, on the podcast, we talk a lot about, self-doubt and the language and Can someone get stuck in either of these states? Like, so it goes from, let's say it goes from heart to brain, or heart to brain, intuition to intellect.
Hmm.
Can people get stuck at intellect? And if they can, how can they get unstuck?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So analysis paralysis and decision fatigue,
Yeah.
right? This is the a key point. This is where people, if they've received an intuition, they can keep on questioning it. Questioning it is not the wrong thing, it's how they question it. This is why I teach people how to ask excellence questions, right? So that they can better understand the intuition they've received, and then they can make an informed decision with their gut.
Mm-hmm.
But if they're always constantly analyzing it, analysis paralysis, like I said, they get stuck in that rut, and then they get tired of making decisions because of decision fatigue, right? Then that's why intuition is reserved for high priority decisions. Everything else can be made with data analysis, numbers, metrics, spreadsheets, and pro con lists, and day-to-day operational decisions. Fine, or even you can outsource them. Doesn't matter, right? But the high priority ones, the ones that take you from successful to extraordinary successful, from a achiever to a high achiever, there's always intuition every single time, right? You see anyone online, even look on my website, I've got a bunch of quotes there from people who like have the world's highest achievers. Everyone knows, even Elon Musk, when he was asked by Chris Anderson on TEDx why he made his decision to purchase Twitter, right, for $44 billion. And he was given the same old reasons, like to democratize the platform, open source the algorithm, free speech and everything. But Chris was like, yeah, you already said this already before. Like, what's different now? Like, why did you do it now instead of before? And he said, my strong intuitive sense pushed me to do it. $44 billion on intuition, right? Well, actually, probably more for on his instincts, you'd say in that situation, right? Because he was still given the same reasons. So it's not your intellectual understanding of a situation or intellectual kind of reason for taking action that's going to help you make that action or to implement that decision. If because you may already have the solution in your mind, your intellect, the reason for doing it, but that's where they get stuck. They keep it in their intellect and they don't take it to their instinct, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so for anyone listening, if you're noticing, I guess, that you constantly spend so much time in that analysis paralysis, I mean, would you agree that it would help to either set a timer, or like, how can you get out of that pattern, I guess, of analysis paralysis? Because it sounds like that is where people get stuck.
Yeah, 100%. This is one thing I struggled with as well.
Yeah, I mean, I used to as well.
Yeah, like being a high achiever, I didn't know I was a high achiever until I analyzed it and analyzed my behavior, going back even to my childhood. Like when I was in uni, for example, I didn't do my coursework. And then in the last week, my tutor said, please do your coursework, So I'm like, all right. So I just did it. It was animation, right? So I chose hand-drawn animation, and I was doodling, and I did it, and I filmed each page and stuff like that, and I handed it in, and I did it in about 3 days, right? Kind of casually, just because I was into it, right? And I was focused, and then my tutor told me that it's the best work she has in her of all her students, including her third year students, and I was the first year.
Wow.
And I just did it in a few days in the last week of the year.
Mm.
And I didn't realize that, as well as other experiences I've had, is an indication I'm a high achiever. This is one of the things I ask my clients to do as well, is that to find out what stage in their journey of being a high achiever they are in, right? Like how much do they actually understand that they're a high achiever, and which area of their lives they're a high achiever? Because for some it can be across the board, but for others it's much more specific. And then this is also the feeling of being an imposter. Imposter syndrome is trying to fit into a group of people who where you don't fit in, mostly because you're a high achiever. And if you try to do things the way all other people are doing, you're a failure, because you you can't do it that way because your zone of excellence is to do it differently. Like I've always felt like as an outsider, like an outcast and different, a failure in many of the ways until I realized actually, I need to I work better with a much higher level of kind of pressure in a way because like for example you mentioned about a timer. In this example is why I brought it up, is that it had a time limit. Okay, I had a very clear deadline to get it done. And so this is what I've learned is to give myself what in some way to impose upon myself without me having an influence in being able to change that, right? Because if it's a false timeline, I can like talk myself out of it, whatever. I could say, oh, I'll do it later, right? Okay, fine. But it needs to be set in a way that I can't change it. And it's like a real timeline. So it needs to shorten the amount of time that you have to accomplish that thing, that goal, because high achievers don't need as much time as everyone else, right? This is one of the questions I ask people. Can you achieve the same or more as someone else, or let's say other people, not necessarily one person, but generally people who work at it a little bit every day for a long period of time. But can you do that in like a few days or a week or a month, depending on like, obviously the outcome of the result, yeah. But can you do that in a much shorter period of time and still get the same quality or better quality of work?
Yeah.
And if their answer is yes, well then they're a high achiever, right? And the imposter syndrome comes from not living in that zone of excellence. They're not being true to themselves. When there's a compassionate reason for that, they somehow have learned that it's not good to differentiate yourself from others because somehow it makes them seem not to think of yourself as better than anyone else. But then there's it's wrong to not live up to your true potential. And it's not wrong to identify yourself as different if you are different. And it's not comparative. You're not comparing yourself to them in terms of your human value because we're all humans who have the same equal value. But in terms of your performance and your skills and expertise or knowledge or your zone of excellence, everybody is different.
Yeah. I am loving this conversation. I hope everyone listening is as well, because I knew from the first time I spoke with James, he just thinks of things differently, but he makes it very simple for everyone to really just relate to this, because everyone on this podcast or who's listening, they are high achievers. And I think they are on this journey. And yes, they come to these points where they experience imposter syndrome in different ways. And we talked about it a couple weeks ago, but just accepting, or like you put it, being honoring the difference in you and honoring the unique brilliance that you have to offer. That is what sets us all apart, because we are all human beings at the foundational level, but each of us are so different based on our experiences, based on where we grew up, based on the education we had or didn't have, or the books that we read, or the people that we surround. Like there's so many different variables that no, it's not possible to have two people that are who are the exact same. And I guess my next question is, as the spiritual coach, like what are some key strategies or actionables that you could recommend for entrepreneurs, to our listeners, to take their intuitive skill set to that next level and ultimately improve the quality of their decision making when they're in such a fast-paced, sometimes high risk environment or business world or situation?
Yeah. So first of all, is about developing a data set of experience to use as a reference point for making higher level decisions. But this data set of experience would be based on a lot of smaller decisions that happen more frequently day to day. And those decisions are typically binary, yes or no. Shall I do that, yes or no? And this is in relation to what typically is called the conscience. Okay, it's the compass, okay, north and south. And this helps us within our immediate environment or set of circumstances. And this is using intuition to communicate with conscience. Okay, there's another aspect of us, which I call the original mind. That's our non-local self, right? Which is beyond even the spirit. I go into that in my coaching as well, because we have spirit stuff, but there's a part of you that animates your spirit as well as animating the physical body. So it's actually your true self is not defined by you as a spiritual being, but it's like there's a part of you that's beyond even that. And then and I help people learn how to experience that part of themselves too, which is it's really beautiful. And that's the innocent part that's in everyone. That's the part that all of us want to see in other people.
Yeah.
And so you can use intuition in relation to your conscience. You can use it in relation to your original mind, okay, your true self. You can also communicate with other spiritual beings. So it could be humans who have already passed on, got to the next world. You can communicate with them. You can communicate with God. So there's different sources of kind of insight or feedback, information. But to get that data set of experience first to use as a reference point for your higher priority decisions, which in a way serves for you developing trust within yourself, right? That you can do this. And so, for example, and I do this every day, all the time, and it usually leads to some cool things because, I mean, that's the whole point, right? It's pretty fun, but it's still always, it's like I did push-ups today. I did 100 push-ups, right? So I was doing 100 every day, but I'm going to do 120 every other day instead, because I found that's like my kind of optimum. And then, but that's like doing something a little bit every day is it's going to help you maintain that skill, right?
Yeah.
The intuitive skill set, and you're keeping your intuition, or you're keeping the compass needle, the knife sharp and the compass needle magnetized. This is essentially what we're doing. So for example, walking out, let's say you're walking in the city and you want to go to a destination, you've got multiple routes to get there. You can say, shall I go left here or shall I go right here? Right? It doesn't really matter which way you go, but you just want to make a decision in the moment, just to be continually honing your intuition, right? So if you ask, shall I go left here? It should be yes or no. If it's yes, then you can ask the other direction, shall I go right here? Yes or no? It should be the opposite answer, right? Sometimes maybe you may get yes and yes or no, no. Either way is fine, but then that's really up to you to make the decision which way to go, right?
Yeah.
And then, but when you get yes or no, when you ask a direction, should I go this way, yes or no, you can, it's either one of two options, right? And an example I give for this one is pretty crazy. I use it because it's one of my craziest examples. When I was fundraising for charities abroad, I was in South Korea, and I learned a little bit of Korean just to communicate and stuff like that. And really, I love the culture there. It's really great. Street food is amazing. And,
Imagine.
so like the red bean paste, kind of fish-shaped savory products are really awesome. So we got dropped off in the city, and then we would get picked up later in the day. We'll get the train or subway back to the other city where our base was. But this one day I missed the last subway home because I was doing some more fundraising, and I decided, instead of calling my team leader to come and pick me up because it was a long commute, I thought I'll just walk back. And I knew generally the direction, but it's my first time in the city, first time in Korea. I didn't know where, but I knew that one road that I could see for like half a mile which way it was. And then so I went there, and every single junction on the way for 2 hours, I asked, shall I go this way, yes or no? 2 hours later, I got back at the base in the other city,
That's wild.
right?
Yeah.
That's pretty freaking nuts.
That is a crazy example.
So, I thought, what's going to happen, right? I'll just phone him up and tell him, I'll look at a local sign, ask someone where I am, right? And I'll probably be a little bit closer than I was before. So,
Hopefully you end up in the next town over. That's
yeah.
crazy, James. But it is incredible how much, I mean, this came up the other day as well. We were talking about what does confidence mean? And it's having intense trust in yourself, which
Hmm.
I love that definition, but that's what you're talking about. It's like, just trust yourself.
Well, yeah, trust yourself, but also it's not just trust yourself because of it, right? Because just for its own
Right.
sake. But
Yeah.
this is where I define difference between confidence and competence.
Hmm.
When you become competent, you're just confident. You just know you can do it, right? So it's I had this experience. This is so funny every time I say it. With a tree. So like when a friend of mine, this is probably 20 years ago, he took me for a ride in his car. We went to a local a kind of ancient site, and there's this tree. It's in Wales, and there's a tree that is so old that its branches drop down to the ground and reroot and come back up as new trees. So it's like a multi-tree, probably, if that's the right word.
Oh,
But it's
okay.
freaking beautiful, right? And um, so I lay down on one of these branches, and they're really, really thick branch, like wider than me. And so I lay back down. It took a little while to settle in, like to get the balance and stuff. But then once I lay on the branch and I settled in, I kind of relaxed all my muscles. It's like I was sucked into the tree, like I absorbed it. And then my sense of self, like the amount of space my body occupies, became that of the tree. And then I could feel how the tree feels breathing the atmosphere, and that there's no separation. We see the trunk of the tree, and then we don't see the air, but we know that there's a distinction. But that felt just like a completely smooth um, process, right? It wasn't just there wasn't a separation. But I kind of had a communication or exchange of consciousness with a tree, and then because there's information in everything, right? Information, energy, right, and all this stuff. And the universe is alive anyway, right? Because we think of plants as being alive. It's a living organism, right? So it's got some what's the word? There's a word I made for this as well. Some kind of a word for plant and then consciousness, phytoconsciousness, I think, something like that.
Hmm.
And or phytosensions or something. So it's kind of related to the book I'm writing about the sentient influence over the cosmos, right?
Hmm.
And so yeah, with this exchange, um, and then I was communicating with the tree about confidence, because my camera went down. Um, so like I used to be incredibly insecure and shy, because this was before I realized like my zone of excellence, right? And started to kind of excel in that. But so I felt out of place. Um, but when I was communicating with the tree, and it asked me like, "What's confidence?" Like, because I said I'm trying to be confident. He said, "What's confidence?" He had no concept of that at all, because a tree is just a tree by nature,
Yeah.
right? It's competent at being a tree. It doesn't have to try to be a tree anymore, right? So if we become competent at being ourselves, which can start with being competent at a skill or some knowledge or something, or just pursuing that desire you have to learn more, become more skilled at something, right? That competence engenders confidence, which is it's an effortless confidence. You don't need to try to be confident.
Wow, that is such an experience and such an exchange of energy. And I could, as you were telling the story, I really could imagine this tree and just how it was coming out of the ground and going back in with trees, and how you're just, yeah, it's incredible the experiences that you've had, but also the experiences that you're creating with others. I know the last time we spoke, you were just launching the spiritual experience, which is
Mm.
this 2-day event. I don't know if you wanted to go into that, but because I know there's a few things, there's a few ways that people can work with you or connect with you if they want to explore this further. And yeah, do you want to give us a little bit of a taster of that as we kind of wrap up, or was there anything else you wanted to talk about while we were on the subject of strategic intuition and flow of intuition and just how you can step into your being spiritually, physically, emotionally? It's such a fascinating conversation, James. I'm so glad we're having this.
Yeah, I'm grateful to be here. And, like I mentioned before we started recording, there's so much to talk about, so much we can discuss. And like for me now, it's over 40 years of experience, right? And, starting with not being exposed to the same conditioning most children are, which really helped me a lot because everyone's intuitive by nature and they get trained out of it. And that's why later in life, most people start getting back into it, thinking there's more to life than they have so far experienced. But then I started experiencing that in my early childhood. And that's what's benefited me in being able to share this now at an age which most people start getting into it.
Yeah.
And so with my coaching, there's one-on-one option as well. But then with my the monthly live event, I call it an action seminar because I literally just teach the steps and then answer any questions that people have about that, and they get access to the curriculum as well, so it can continue at their own time and their own speed. It's a 2-day live event, and so there's 2 strategies that I teach. One is the flow of intuition, and so like I said, like we discussed, about the 3 steps, and then starting that with the intuition, communicating with your conscience, but then also communicating with other sources of intelligence to make informed decisions. And then the other option, the other process, or I call it process because it's not a method, right? A method is an application of a process, but a process is fundamental. A method is not necessarily fundamental; it just may be one way of applying a process. And I've always focused on understanding the core processes to things. And that's why it's more relatable, because it doesn't matter what your experience or background is, you can understand that in the way you do through your experience, right? And I appreciate how you said about me having simplified the explanations and descriptions of it, because I put in a lot of effort over a good 20 years, right, to simplify a lot of these terms, because and to understand how to communicate it effectively and simply, because there's a lot of jargon, spiritual jargon, that a lot of spirituality coaches use: harmony, resonance, frequency, healing, and like a lot of which require belief, and there's not true understanding behind them, right? Even though they're scientific terms, but yeah, let's talk about the science of that so you can understand what a frequency is, different to a wavelength, and so on, right? But we're on the same wavelength. Okay, yeah, how does that mean? The electromagnetism emitted by your brain is the same frequency as mine. How can we measure that? Let's use an ECG machine, right? But do we have that? No. How do we know then? Right? So there's a lot of like, you really want to get into the actual science of it, which is what I do, right? You need to be specific, right? So, but what's the easiest and quickest way to get the same outcome, the same result that they're seeking, without having to like elicit belief in the part of my clients on something they don't truly understand? I want to actually impart understanding, which leads to an effective application of correct knowledge, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why I don't, even though I'm like my website, thespiritualitycoach.com, I don't teach like typically spirituality coach, but I don't use the same terms. Because I don't see it that as the most effective way to communicate. So the second strategy, the second process I teach, I call it the infinite joint venture. And this is where we form a joint venture partnership with infinite intelligence, like Napoleon Hill describes in Think and Grow Rich. And there's like a core to the universal core of intelligence. Whether or not it's sentient, that's another topic for another conversation. But the fact is, even through science and so on, the universe is based off information and energy, right? So we can access that.
Mhm.
And there's it's a joint venture. It's a cooperative relationship, right? We're forming a partnership together to do something, to get an outcome together that's mutually beneficial. And you have to put something in to get something out. So this goes beyond like manifesting or materializing success. I describe it as materializing success, but it's a co-creative process instead of you having to do it all yourself. And in many instances, you actually do the minimum to get the outcome you want. Because when you pay something, you could pay less, you could pay what is asked, or you may have to pay more. All right, so it really depends. And I've put in a lot of time to make a lot of mistakes to find out like what works and what doesn't work with this system. And
Mhm.
it's actually this process is indicated towards in spiritual text, right? It's referenced, but without being explicitly identified as a process, right? But it's in stories and stuff. And it's actually very successful. Like one of my clients phoned me when she implemented this. And part of it is letting go because we're not trying to create the results, right? We're putting in an investment of energy, right, through being in action into this joint venture partnership or relationship so that as the foundation for reciprocation so that we can receive something in return,
Yeah.
right? So we're not actually trying to like create the outcome, but we're investing energy into that partnership to then be able to be reciprocated with and receive the outcome, right? So it's very
Mhm.
different. And it's not about how much power you put in either, right? Because it's more you're doing it in harmony with principles rather than how much energy you generate. And above all, sincerity is the most important because you could make a mistake, but as long as it's like an honest mistake, right? And you're sincere, it's not a problem, right?
Yeah.
So, because people learn and grow and get better. So I teach that as well. Like I mentioned, one of my clients, she phoned me in midnight. I knew it was going to be good because it was midnight. She never really calls me at that time. And also I pressed record on my phone. So I recorded it and she was crying, crying, crying. Because um she I typically take my clients through this process like 3 times in a row, one time per month. And she with a little break in between, but she didn't take a break. She just wanted to go straight into the next one because she was experiencing like results from it,
Mhm.
but not the main results she wanted. And I said, look, stop trying to make it happen.
Right.
So when she took a break and she relaxed, it all came to her. And she phoned me, she was crying her eyes out.
It's so the way, isn't it? Like there's so many times I can even think of just like wanting to just keep pushing and pushing and pushing. And then the minute I just said, you know what, I'm just gonna surrender. I'm gonna just let it happen. And it did. And you just
Yeah.
it's that whole redefining of, what does hard work mean and how does it really have to be that hard, or can we find ease in what we do, and it's about the being, not the doing, and all of these things that come into play, but that
Hmm.
the thing I love about having you here is that you bring it back to a scientific, simple, easy to understand and follow and relate to process, which, for people who are listening, they're going to take this away and be like, I'm going to implement this because I understand it. It's not this far-fetched thing, and there definitely needs to be continued understanding and education around it. It's not like you can listen to this podcast and be like, oh, okay, I've got it now.
Hmm.
Just like anything, everything is practice makes progress,
Hmm.
and just diving in. This is like the tip of the iceberg, if I could even say that, because, being able to attend your experience, the 2-day live experience, I think for anyone, it would be phenomenal, and just the beginning of the spiritual journey, really, if I could say it like that.
Yeah, 100%. Like I don't hold anything back either. It's the same coaching I would give to a one-on-one client. It's just a different level of access, and like it's just a limited period of time, and it's in a group setting. But apart from that, there's nothing else. If anyone wants to ask a question, I answer it, and I give training on it. So it's it really just depends on where people are and what they can what's within their reach. Um, so it's yeah, it's a journey I've been on my whole life. And I'm grateful to like share it. Like one of my earliest experiences when I was 10. It's just to quickly kind of round off a conversation on this, right? Is I went to my parents took me to a child psychologist because they divorced when I was 10, and I've got three siblings, and they stopped taking them because okay, they adapted, okay, fixed, whatever, right? But then they kept taking me because that was more unusual. I wouldn't more easily just go along with the flow of what they wanted me to do. And this one time they wanted me to come into a room that my two parents and two psychologists were there, and I refused to enter the room. But I was staring at the mirror on the left wall, and I felt like I was being watched. And then a few minutes later, one of the psychologists walked over to me and he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "James, do you want to see what's behind the mirror?" So I nodded my head, and he took me out of the room and into the next room adjacent to it. And he turned the lights on. And there was a third psychologist, a woman with a clipboard and pen taking notes. And then there were two men operating, this is in the early 90s, two VHS cassette camcorders, TV cameras, right, on tall metal tripods, two of them filming through what I could now see was one-way mirror on the wall, right? And I was staring at that mirror, feeling like I was being watched. But the cool thing is, why did he show me behind the mirror, right? That's interesting, right? But what it showed me is that even though I didn't know the term one-way mirror, I didn't know the terms intuition or all that stuff, but the experience was there and it's recorded. I know who is a government facility. I know how I walked there on Google Maps because I remember the route. So I know the building and the address. And then so I learned that I could trust my intuition. What I now know is my intuition, and that it's accurate and reliable. I can use it to get actionable intelligence, right? That's the key phrase to understand, is that it's about being able to acquire actionable intelligence to make highly successful, informed decisions, in your life, either personally or professionally. And that's really the fundamental concept to understand. And yeah, it does take some training, but with a little bit of training, like I mentioned about using conscience, intuition in relation with conscience, conscience, right? That's right. I was thinking about other terms, but for those yes and no decisions, the everyday, day-to-day decisions, right? That's continually honing and sharpening your knife, right? So I would highly recommend doing that. And then you build up your data set of experience for then being able to use intuition on a high level with high priority decisions when there's a lot more at risk. And the strategy for that changes a bit more as well, because it's a different kind of situation. And you need to eliminate emotion a lot more from that as well, because you can still use emotion a little bit with conscience, but there's an exchange between an emotion or feeling. A feeling is physical expressed emotion. So emotion is in the mind, but when it's expressed physically in the body, that's a feeling. But there's a translation from those information. You can turn it into actionable intelligence, but that's another skill set to learn as well. Translating emotion into intelligible information. But then, but yeah, I highly recommend everyone get started, with that because it's a foundation for a lot of things. You'd be quite surprised what you can achieve with it. Because, like I said, I'd go back to the city just by asking a question, yes or no. And that's the thing. Most decisions are based on that, right? The high priority, life-changing ones come about infrequently. They have a greater impact, but it's good to be prepared for that. But one way to get prepared is by making those smaller decisions in a more reliable way.
Yeah, no, it's incredible. And I've really enjoyed this conversation because there's just so many golden nuggets that anyone can take away, whether it's making better decisions, whether it's being more trusting of yourself, following that heart, brain, gut
Hmm.
flow of intuition, which I think is genius. Like it's just
Hmm.
so, it just makes so much sense. And I think if anyone can just, if you take away just that from this conversation, I think that there's going to be a lot more effective decisions, a lot more just trust within yourself that yes, you can. And like you said, just making those little decisions on a daily basis, that compound effect on how you
Yeah,
feel and how you use your intuition and how you feel that you can use your intuition. It's going to just, explode or
yeah.
exponentially like help you grow,
And,
which
and every time you make a successful decision, even if it's a small one, congratulate yourself for it. Give yourself a dopamine hit, right? And be like, yeah, you did it. Well done. Even if it's a tiny little one, right? Every single
yeah,
time do that. Reinforce that successful decision making. That's really key. Because you're not going to be encouraged to do that with a bigger decision if you feel nervous or you can't do it. And that's where confidence leading the confidence is reinforced. So you congratulate yourself every time you make a successful decision. And
yeah,
you
like
know,
no matter how small is what you said, because it's often the small wins that we overlook.
mm,
And, sometimes it's the small wins that are those little tiny little decisions
yeah,
that actually make a huge difference over time.
yeah.
Yeah, we definitely have to have you back, James. And I know we're gonna put the link to your spiritual experience around this episode somewhere. And I know that you're going to offer a discount to our
Mm,
listeners,
yeah.
um, which is amazing. So I'll definitely put the code as well that you can put in. Um, and it's going to be MSMU, which are the initials for Modern Self Mastery Unleashed, the
Cool.
podcast.
I love the name of the podcast. It's freaking awesome.
Well, you definitely said self-mastery in here a few times, so we're definitely gonna have to have you back, and we'll have to have you with Paul on here as well, because I'm sure he would love this conversation.
Cool.
So thank you so much, and we'll see everyone next time.
Yeah, thank you. Take care.